So I took the theme this morning, the power of losing, the power of losing. We all, it's a World Cup, the World Cup happened and we won and we're grateful for that. But that English game I watched, you watched the English game when we played the English. On 60 minutes, I was prepared that we're going to lose. And I was going to preach the next day. So in my mind, I had to make peace with us losing against England, which is difficult for me because I don't like England. And so it was really hard for me. So I had to mentally say to myself, Willem, it's okay if we lose. I don't want to lose, but it's okay. It's okay if we lose. But it's in our nature to not lose and to never lose. We don't want to lose. We don't want to lose. So I want to start with the first question. In a divided world, we know the world is divided by, let's say, normal boundaries, metaphysical boundaries, emotional boundaries. There's boundaries and there's grenzen, there's places. But in this divided world, what is our goal? So a simple sermon would be, the goal is to unite, the goal is... But I want to say, what is your goal in a country and in a world that is judgmental, that is different, that is looking at people differently? What is your specific goal? So if I take you back to the Bible, there's a congregation who's quite close to what we're experiencing today. It's the city of Corinth. Now, last week I also preached on Corinthians. So Corinth, we all know, was this harbor city. I just want to say something about last week. Sorry, I'm going back. Just want to go forward. It's a harbor city. So remember, the main source of economy was, rail handle, selling stuff off the boats. But what would happen is you would get all different types of people coming around Greece, coming around all those places. And then in the city, there would be different ethnicities, and there would be different places and people coming together. So the second thing was people were fighting over predominantly a lot of things, but predominantly three things. There were the sophists, the spiritual gifts, and economic classes. So there were people who had different spiritual gifts, those who can pray in tongues. That's what we did last week in 1 Corinthians 12, 13, 14. So they would look down on people who can't preach in tongues or can't pray in tongues. And Paul brings them together and says, listen, the gifts that the Spirit gives you is not of who you are, it's from the Spirit. So it's not because I achieved something that I suddenly have some sort of gift. The gift is given by the Spirit for the congregation. So the purpose is, if I was to stand in here and pray in tongues, someone would come and he would explain it or lead it out. For what purpose? To bring the congregation together. So in Acts 2, it's quite nice. They prayed in tongues, but then they all went out and they preached the gospel in their own language, which is quite nice. So the gospel is in your language. I think 2 weeks ago I did a sermon, what language does God speak? God speaks you. He doesn't speak another language. He doesn't speak Afrikaans, English, Xhosa. He doesn't speak it. He speaks you by name, each and every one by you. So the sophists were these elite figures that I have a picture of it. They were like, this is a statue of one of them, but so you can just imagine them. They would walk up straight, walk slowly, because if you would walk slowly, you would be important. They would have robes, and they would have gold, and they would have a lot of things. But the main thing they would have is they would talk in such a manner that people would listen. And they would become idols. People would want to be like them. Exactly like today. If people were to walk down the street, we want to be like them. So these people were walking there, and then people would say, I'd rather follow them. I'd rather follow them instead of following Paul or following Christ. So in Brazil, I got this photo from The Guardian. So this is an actual photo of the world today. It was almost like that in those days. A world where on the one side you have something completely different to the other side. And in this divided world, we find ourselves on this side or that side. What is the purpose? What is the goal? So looking at that picture, this was in Sao Paulo, Brazil. In a divided world, what is our goal? Let's go to 1 Corinthians. I want to start with 1 Corinthians 3. So Paul is preaching to this divided congregation, divided gemeenskap, community, this divided place where there's ethnical boundaries, and there's language boundaries, and there's classes boundaries of rich and poor, and then there's people who are following different idols, and then within those communities they have different churches with different gifts. And some churches were looking down on other churches saying, we've got special gifts you don't have. It's almost like, I think you get it today, where some churches think they're better than other churches. It's like a competition, which is so stupid, because we're not in a competition. Who's winning? In 1 Corinthians 3, Paul says, so if I would say something, and now Paul is this teacher, so don't boast about following a particular human leader, for everything belongs to you. Whether Paul or Apollos or Peter. So in this world, there were the sophists, there were Paul, and Apollos was another figure, and Peter was another figure. So people were following them as if they were idols, as if they were Christ. They were following these church leaders as if they were Christ. He says, whether you're one of these, or the world, or life or death, or the present or the future, everything belongs to you, and you belongs to Christ. You belong to Christ, and Christ belongs to God. So in the next one he says, I had to feed you milk, or I had to feed you with milk, not with solid food, because we weren't ready for anything stronger, and you still aren't ready. For you are still controlled by your sinful nature. You are jealous of one another, and you quarrel with each other. Doesn't that prove you are controlled by your sinful nature? Aren't you living like people of the world? Now Paul is talking to Corinthians. He's talking to those churches and saying, why are you fighting? Why are you jealous of one another? Why are you controlled by your sinful nature? So I've got this picture of a beautiful, that was me when I was born, not the bird, the baby. So a baby that is born can never control its own impulses. Have you seen a baby? So I want to tell this story of a baby and a drunk person. They're almost the same. When you're at a place, you say, we're going to leave. And they're like, no, I'm going to leave. And you put them in the car and they sleep. So they can't control their own impulses. A baby can't. So when he's hungry, he cries. When he's sad, he cries. When he's emotionally unstable, he cries or she cries because they can't control it. The other one is a fat budgie, which we used to preach on a lot. It's where we think of, many people think of churches and people that you just need to feed them all the time. And they sit in this cage and they want to be fed, and then they become a budgie that can't fly. When you open the gates, they can't fly. So, in a divided world, what is the message that Paul gives us? Paul gives us this message. He says, you have to be mature. Mature means you control your own impulses. You, like when you mature and you sit at a table, you wait till the food comes for everyone and you share with everyone. And when you're unhappy, you don't scream. And when you're unhappy, you don't shout. You have manners. So, my first message is, in a divided world, and our goal firstly, I think, is to not make people happy. We are not here to make people happy. And the second one is, others' happiness is not your responsibility. And I have to remind myself this all the time. Paul didn't want the people of Corinth to be happy. He didn't give a message to them and say, I want you to be happy. You know, at the cost of your own life, we try to keep people happy. And it's family members, and it's friends, and maybe it's even people on the outside. But we give so much of ourselves that we lose ourselves just to make other people happy. And Paul says, my first priority is not to make you happy. It's not to give you a bottle like a baby and then you have to be fed and you have to be happy, or this budgie that needs to be fed all the time. My first responsibility, my first goal is not to make others happy. So what is my goal then? In a divided world, firstly, I'm not on this earth to make people happy. The second one is, I think in 1 Corinthians 3, it also says, for we are both God's workers, and you are God's field. You are God's building. So on this earth, I'm not to make people happy. What am I? I am God's building. Because of God's grace to me, I have laid the foundation like an expert builder. Now others are building on it. But whoever is building on this foundation must be very careful. For no one can lay any foundation other than the one we already have, Jesus Christ. Firstly, my goal is not to make people happy. Secondly, my goal is to be a foundation. What is this foundation that he's talking about? This foundation looks like this. If anyone builds on a foundation, so on earth, if anyone builds on a foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, and straw, how many people build their lives on silver, gold, stones, wood, hay, and straw? How many build their lives on material things to be someone? How many of us try to be something we're not? So I don't want to make other people happy, but I also don't need to be someone I'm not. I don't need to build as a foundation in Christ. I don't need material things to be part of His foundation. So their work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each person's work. If what has been built survives, the builder will receive a reward. If it is burned up, the builder will suffer loss, but yet will be saved, even though only as one escaping through the flames. And then he comes to this. He says, don't you know that you yourself or yourselves are God's temple? Now this is something we always think about. So, how many am I allowed to drink and smoke because the Bible says my body is a temple? I think it's more than that. It's not like, yeah, you can't drink and smoke. It's more than that. Because always, can I put tattoos because the Bible says my body is a temple? No. You know what a temple means? And this is what I want to come to. A temple is basically, it's God's address on earth. That's what it is. In the Old Testament and in the New Testament, when Jesus would walk around, if you wanted to see God, you would go to the temple. It would be this massive figure and you would see God. And when Paul says that temple is now you, it doesn't mean certain things. It means that when people come in contact with you, they must see Christ. And I'm going to elaborate on that a bit more. Interesting, there's two Greek words here, the heron and the naos. So the word he used there is not the heron, but the naos, the most intimate place of the temple. He says you must be the temple. You must be the most intimate place where God dwells. So it would look like something like this. In the Bible, it would look like this. You would see it immediately. So you must be a temple. I'm not on this earth to make people happy. I'm a temple on this earth. So I have God's address written on me. So what must I do now next? The next thing is the wisdom of God. So this is some text I really want to cling to and it really took me. The message of the cross is foolish to those who are headed for destruction. But we who are being saved now, it is the very power of God, as the scriptures say. I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and discard the intelligence of the intelligent. So where does this leave the philosophers? Now remember, those in Corinth were the philosophers and the scholars and the world's brilliant debaters. God has made the wisdom of the world look foolish, since God in his wisdom saw to it that the world would never be known in him through human wisdom. He has used our foolish preaching to save those who believe. Now this is the one. It is foolish to the Jews who ask a sign in heaven. So let's say it's like Christians. The Jews were like a sort of Christians standing there saying, if I want to see God, the heavens would open up and I would see God. Paul says it's not going to happen. You're not going to lie on your back and see God. He says God is within you. You are a temple and God is dwelling in you. So don't look for signs from heaven. Maybe look for signs in people, those around you. To the Greeks, so the Jews were obviously looking for this sign, and the Greeks were looking, it is foolish to them because they seeked human wisdom. They said, well, if we want to find God, we would find him in wisdom. So when I preach, so Paul says, when I have authority to preach, what is my goal and my purpose? Is a temple, not to make people happy, but if I preach and if I am something and if I will be something. So when we preach that Christ was crucified, the Jews are offered and the Gentiles say it's all nonsense. But to those called by God to salvation, both Jews, both Gentiles, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. So what causes unity in a divided world? What causes unity in a divided world? It's when we don't try to make people happy. It's when we are God's image in this world, which is in the form of a temple, and this temple took the shape of a human being, as Jesus did. And this temple will preach what? This temple will move around doing what? Being the cross. But to those called by God to salvation, both Jews, so he unites everyone. The foolish plan of God is wiser than the wisest of human plans, and God's weakness is stronger than the greatest of human strength. I want to move to this text. So, in the end he says, it is foolish to the Jews to ask for a sign in heaven, and it is foolish to the Greeks who seek human wisdom. So we preach that Christ was crucified. The Jews are offended, and the Gentiles say it's all nonsense. In a divided world, in Paul's divided world, how did he unite Jews and Gentiles? In South Africa, how do we unite different cultures, different races? How do we bring together all these things? All people, all God's children. How do we unite them? Well, firstly, we don't please everyone. Firstly, Paul didn't go out and say, I'm here to please everyone. He said, I will be a visible sign of God. God who went over all boundaries. And then what did God do? He became the cross. Now the cross was nonsense. Why was the cross nonsense? The cross was nonsense. The cross was nonsense. In the Roman Empire, crosses were a common thing. We always think always when we see the image of the cross, we see this, hanging and it's amazing and it's beautiful and it's precious and. The cross in the Roman Empire was a symbol of death. If you had a cross, you would die. If you would see someone walking with a cross, what would you see? He's going to die, no matter who. So interesting, I read on this, like they would crucify people in different ways, upside down or upwards. They would use different types depending on which culture or which empire was involved. They would let people hang to die, and they would let people just suffer, maybe take them off later. But the symbol of the cross was death. So as you would walk into Rome, remember now there's no cars and no form of transport, no train. You would walk with your donkey and what would you see? You would start seeing crosses like every 10 meters with someone hanging on it. And the image of the cross was what? Don't do what these guys did because they died. And what did these guys do? They stood up against Rome. They stood up against the empire. So interestingly, the first 300 years, and that's why we have this fish, was the first Christian symbol was a fish. It was never a cross, because the cross never gave people hope. The cross never gave people hope. And that's why Paul says in Corinth that the cross is foolish. The cross is foolish. My goal on earth, and as a reverend and as a pastor and just as a normal human being and a Christian, is not to be on this earth and sacrifice myself by making people happy. I don't need to live every day and go every day and say, I'm here to make you happy, I'm here to make you happy. My goal is to be a representation of who God is. And this representation looks everything but perfect. It looks like a human, a normal human. Not a specific color, not a specific race, not a specific anything. Just a normal human being. And the message that I sent and that I want to send out and that you have to send out to this world is the message of the cross. And what is the message of the cross? It's if you would to hang someone there, you would firstly do what? You would remove his clothes. You would make him naked because you would it would be a shame. And then when you are naked, you're pulled up, so you're raised above the people, so the people can see and witness this shameful person who's just surrendering. And in the midst of hanging, looking down on people judging, people being cross, people destroying the world, people making bad things, what do? You respond differently. And that's the message of the cross. The cross teaches me that before you win, you lose. Before you win anything, you have to lose. The cross teaches me that Jesus had to lose everything to gain everything. So the cross is like the ultimate loss and the ultimate reward. It's the ultimate sacrifice and the ultimate victory. So let's make it a bit practical. If I'm this temple on earth and I'm representing the cross on earth and it's foolish to people, what does it mean in practice? What does it mean? I thought of a few things to say. This would be the cross in modern times. It would be to lose a lot of things. So what would the things be that I can lose on this earth, which is okay? So I just thought of a few things. I thought it's okay to lose an argument. That's what the cross teaches me. Because sometimes you win an argument, but you lose the person. You win an argument and you lose the relationship. Because my opinion is so right that I lose this whole relationship. So being the cross means I can just listen you out and we can have an argue. And I don't need to win this argument. The cross teaches me to lose fear. Like the fear of death. Not one time in the Bible I read that Jesus was raised, naked, standing, ashamed, and he was scared. Nowhere it says he was scared. Instead, he says, Father, in your hands I surrender myself. I can lose an argument. I can lose fear. You need to lose fear in your life. The cross teaches me to lose aggression. When he got hanged, he never said, wait until I get down from here. And he could have. Imagine, if it was a normal human being, he would say, just wait. When I get to my Father, I'm coming back. And you're going to pay. No, the cross teaches me I need to lose aggression. The cross teaches me I need to lose envy over others. When Jesus was hanging, he wasn't like, oh, I wish I was down there. Oh, I wish I was someplace else. He was hanging there and saying, this is the will of the Father. I don't envy anyone or any other place. I would lose overthinking. Jesus never hanged on the cross and he had this whole debate about Jesus, God, what is happening? What's going to happen? How's the plan working? Where is it going to go? Where are we going to go? What is next? What is happening tomorrow? He's dying. Yet he doesn't worry about tomorrow or later. He's submitting to the will of God. So the cross teaches me, lose aggression, lose envy, lose overthinking. I don't need to overthink. I'm a cross. I'm part of God's will. Lose anxiety. Never on the cross I see Jesus sweating or worrying. Did you see God worrying? It's amazing. The only time he worried was in the garden. In the garden he worried. Because then there he had to pray to God and say, what is the plan? What is going on? And God confirmed to him, this is the plan. And as soon as God told him, this is the plan, he said, okay. And when it happened on the cross, he didn't become anxious. He said, well, Lord, I know. The cross teaches me to lose your dependence on material things, because Jesus was naked on the cross. He wasn't worried about what he was wearing. He was naked on the cross. So I put in 1/10 there, because we all think of this, a tiende, giving 1/10. I don't know what it's in English. You're giving 1/10 to the church. You need to give this, and the Bible says jy moet jou tiende gee, jou tiende. So I always ask, what happens to the other 9? You always give 1 out of 10 you give to God, but 9 out of 10 you keep to yourself, which is good, but what do you do with it? Your dependence on material things. Jesus teaches me that I don't need to depend on material things. I can lose it. I want to end off with this. Oh, sorry, that's a type error. Lose things that positions your soul. No, sorry, it's right. Lose things that poisons your soul. Like, lose the willpower to revenge. And this was that 2 Peter text where Jesus is hanging there and he's not wanting to revenge. Lose the willpower to revenge, submitting to the will of God. Let God be the judge. In this world, my purpose, a temple, a cross, means no revenge. Let God be the judge. It means I lose my hate and prejudice. For the final words on the cross was, Father, forgive them. They do not know what they're doing. He's not singling out a single person. He's not singling out a single race. He's not singling out a single group. He's not singling out anything. He says, just forgive these people. They do not know what they're doing. If I would lose these things, would I lose? If I were to lose all this is just a few things I thought of and I could mention. Was I to be a bad human or so ek sleg wees? I think you would be better off. I think you would be better off to not win every argument. You would be better off not depending on material things all the time. You will be better off not thinking of other people, judging other people. You would be better off not seeking revenge. And the amazing thing is the Bible teaches us these things. The Bible teaches us these things. In the Old Testament it says, don't kill your neighbor or don't kill other people. In the New Testament it says, love your enemies. Love your enemies. This is a challenge to you. This is a challenge to me. When we go out here, we go into a divided country, we go into a divided world. A world where there's wars, where there's tension, where people are shouting different things. And if we were to change this world, we would have to go and lose. We would have to go and be servants. We would have to go and kneel at other people's feet. Starting with your marriage. Starting with your family. Starting with those around you. And maybe even closer, starting with your enemies.